Welcome to the Get Trauma Informed podcast, dedicated to unraveling the complexities of trauma, its pervasive impact, and the journey towards holistic recovery and realignment. If your radiance has ever felt muted, like I and thousands of others, you're in the right place to reignite your inner light. I'm your host, Wellness Coach Liz Blanding, and this is the Get Trauma Informed podcast. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Mini Trauma Recovery Talks. And the reason that we are doing the Mini Trauma Recovery Talks is because many of the guests that are just blessing us with their stories and with their expertise, they're dropping so many powerful nuggets. And so we wanted to take some of those nuggets and just kind of serve those up in some bite-sized pieces to help us to really understand why we are walking through the Get Trauma Informed movement, why it's so important for people to get the message and to become aware, not just those of us like myself that have suffered through trauma and became a thriver versus just surviving every day. It's important that we stay on our recovery plan. It's important that we have a self-care plan, right? Things will be going just great. And, you think the world is like on your side. And then all of a sudden, trauma, the meanness of trauma will show up. And that's why I labeled today's episode or titled today's episode as Trauma is Mean, right? This is what trauma looks like. What does that mean? Trauma shows up for everybody different. If you have somebody that have gone through trauma, maybe I want to say, let's say a military veteran, and paying homage to all of the military veterans. My dad was in active duty in, I believe it was the Korean War. And you will have our soldiers that come back and they will have experienced such trauma that they have or will be diagnosed with PTSD. So if you have a veteran that went into the service and have been diagnosed with PTSD, that's a form of trauma, right? There are some people like myself that have gone through trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma, and that becomes or develops into complex PTSD. Now, what is different is that we think about what does trauma look like? And I think for the most part, we're looking for someone maybe that's unkept, right? But that is a misnomer. There are hundreds of people, I want to say thousands of people, because if we look at the statistics that are, approximately 70% of adults in the US have experienced at least one traumatic event in their life. PTSD is about 8% of the population, or 8% of the population will develop PTSD at some point. But this is the thing. A lot of people expect for a person that has suffered through trauma or mental illness will have a tattered, unkept look, but that is not true. What does trauma look like, right? Trauma can be any of us, right? Any of us that get up in the mornings and do our self-care and present ourselves into the world. But when trauma shows up, sometimes it's unexpected. And for some people, somebody may have had or experienced a PTSD event like we talked about with the soldier. But if you have somebody that experienced trauma from a child and then every milestone in their life was recorded by another trauma, such as myself, complex PTSD shows up different. And for me, that has been such a challenge in my life because people look at me and I'm always saying, I'm okay. And I had to learn it's okay not to be okay. And it's okay to understand and learn what your triggers are. For me, I did not learn my triggers until later on in life. And that's why this became such a passionate movement for me. Imagine driving down the road, enjoying a beautiful day when suddenly a tree jumps out in front of your car. In an instant, trauma hits and your life is flipped upside down, both physically and psychologically. This was my reality. And that's what drew me into the holistic wellness and trauma recovery coaching. And it was just based on the transformational journey that I was able to go through and, be able to, experience recovery. But what is important is to understand the title of today's podcast or today's mini podcast. Trauma is mean. And if you don't do something about it, guess what happens? It is progressive and it gets worse. So I am looking at some of the statistics here, and it's really, if you want to go and do more research or get more information or really, really become aware, you can get information from the National Center of PTSD, right? You can get information from the National Child Trauma Stress Network, from the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, the Office of Victims of Crimes, the OVC, the National Institute of Health, NIH. There is also an American Journal of Public Health. And again, according to the National Center for PTSD, we talk about approximately 70% of adults in the US have experienced that trauma. And see, sometimes someone can go through a traumatic event and not experience PTSD, right? It just depends on the person, depends on their makeup and their body, depends on how that traumatic effect, how those messages was received. And the thing of it is, I've heard people say, and this is so annoying. People will say, snap out of it. People will say, just just be happy or just feel better. They don't understand that there is a biochemical reaction that's going on into your body, and that's what the triggers are. But it's just like if you are pushing the panic button, the red panic button, and that child or that inner child inside of you is continuously pushing that button. You're steady getting a fusion of the hormones, right? You're steady getting this chemical reaction in your body, this fight, flight, or freeze action is going on. Now imagine working through life or moving through life or navigating through your everyday in that mode, right? This is what a traumatic experience for me. This is what happens, right? There is a feeling of overwhelm, right? What does it look like? It feels like I'm drowning on the inside, like water is actually filling up and it gets to my neck or to my throat and I can't swallow. And the water continues to come and continues to go. If I'm reading, the words will become blurred. They will blur out. I know a lot of people will be able to identify and relate to these. These are all signs that your body is your nervous system is just went haywire because there's been too much stimuli, too much stress going on at one time in the body. Your words can become blurred. Like I said, when I'm reading, sometimes the words will become blurred if I'm in that trigger state, right? There is pressure in your head, your voice is gone. All trauma does not look alike. And I really wanted to get that message out there. Somebody could have gone through a horrific car accident and just had to totally rehab, right? Okay, that's one form, right? But you can have somebody else, such as myself, that have gone through that type of tremendous type of a car accident and then have other types of trauma that was compiled on top of that. So my reaction or response to stress will be different than the person that may have had one bout of trauma. So I wanted to bring today an awareness because we never know if the person standing or working right beside us have gone through a traumatic event and something that we say may trigger. So it's not to cause any type of panic, but it's just to help us to be more sensitive and more caring to one another and just to become more trauma aware, right? So I hope sharing my truth and sharing my stories and transparency, this will be able to help other people to really understand and have more empathy for the next person, right? I've been told this my entire career. Man, I would have never known if you had not said anything. That's because I became a master at saying these words. I'm okay. Even to myself, I'm okay. When actually I want to say, no, you're not okay. But because I've learned how to walk through this journey and utilize the systems around me and actually put myself into amazing circles of people that actually care, and that you can put your secret in their hands and they will help you to walk and navigate through life, because this is a lifelong journey. Once you have gone through trauma, it always stays with you. However, we can learn and we can manage it and we can recover and we can live full, wonderful, amazing, joyous lives without the fear on our one shoulder and trauma sitting on the other shoulder. I hope this has been helpful. I do work towards bringing my experience because I just believe, and actually I get feedback that the stories do help, because then we understand that we're not in this alone, right? We understand that it's okay. We get rid of the embarrassment, the shame, the blame, the guilt, and all of those things that are associated with trauma. All right. I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to sharing more mini trauma recovery talks. These nuggets are meant to help push us and move us forward. All right. Until next time. Bye for now. It's time to buckle up. No more suffering in silence. Our Power Pack journey to recovery and realignment starts now. Remember, you were collateral damage on someone else's warpath. Trauma is not your fault. Recovery, however, is your responsibility. I'm your host, Wellness Coach Liz Blanding, and this is the Get Trauma Informed podcast.